All right, welcome back. It is the Vegas Take, Sharp and Shapiro. So glad that you can join us on a Tuesday. You know, we've talked a lot about white supremacy. We've talked a lot about these mass shootings and the rise in hate crimes. And the guy we have with us on the line right now, a perfect person to talk about this sort of stuff. His name is Christian Picciolini, and he wrote a book out called Breaking Hate. He is a former white supremacist who's turned his life around and changed his views, and he joins us on the line right now. Christian, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure, you bet. And by the way, your book is out in February. We'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, let's start from the beginning. Why did you decide way back in your life to become a white supremacist? Can you take me back to that time where you had that hatred inside of you and you decided to act on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of am breaking the stereotype, but what is actually the norm is I came from a normal family, and I had a pretty decent life. And at 14 years old, that changed. You know, my parents are Italian immigrants, so they came over in the 60s. So I really kind of grew up lonely and isolated. They were working 7 days a week, 16 hours a day. So I started to search for family and a sense of identity, community, and purpose elsewhere. And one day at 14 years old, I was standing in an alley and I was smoking a joint, and a guy came up to me with a shaved head and boots, and he pulled that joint out of my mouth and he said, "That's what the communists and the Jews want you to do to keep you docile."
Wow.
And I didn't understand a word of what he was saying.
Right.
I didn't even know, what a Jew, a communist, or what the word docile meant.
Huh.
But it was the first time in my life at 14, and this was in 1987. It was my first time that I felt like somebody had seen me. And what happened next was he didn't pick on me for my last name when he asked what my name was, because everybody,
Right.
Bullied me for my last name. Instead, he said, "Oh, that's Italian.
Right.
You should be proud of that. Your ancestors were great warriors and thinkers and artists."
So you have I'm sorry, I just want to say, sorry to interrupt. So you have family that they're working, 15, 16, 17 hours a day. You don't have much of a family life, and you finally get a little bit of attention, right? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this guy comes up to you and starts asking you questions and maybe lecturing you to an extent, but you liked the attention. You liked the fact that somebody was actually learning about you, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. We search for identity, community, and purpose, and the ideology really is secondary to why people gravitate towards extremist movements. They're trying to fill those three very important voids of identity, community, and purpose. The ideology for somebody who's lonely, angry, feels a sense of loss, or feels alienated, or maybe is dealing with trauma, that empowerment of an ideology then is just the green light for them to project their anger, project their pain, and to do those types of things.
So, Christian, how long were you a white supremacist? And give me a story or two of some of the craziest things that either you saw or that you heard from fellow white supremacists in that time.
Well, I spent 8 years from the time I was 14 until I was 23 as one of the earliest and youngest members of America's first neo-Nazi skinhead group, which I then led when I was 17 years old, and the man who recruited me had gone to prison for one of the earliest hate crimes prosecuted.
Oh, my God.
And, at 17 years old, I'd gone from this powerless, 13-and-a-half-year-old to suddenly this feared and in some ways revered 17-year-old. So I made it my mission to spread the message. I had gotten really intoxicated on this perceived sense of power. So I made music, and I, was in one of the first American white power bands and the first one to travel overseas to take that message overseas.
Wow.
And I wrote songs that, called people animals. I wrote songs and lyrics that, encouraged people to commit acts of violence. And in fact, 27 years later, I learned that 4 months before Dylan Roof walked into the Mother Emanuel Church and murdered the parishioners there, he had posted my lyrics on a white supremacist message board asking, what the band,
okay,
songs from that band.
I have to stop you there because that is fascinating to me and sad. So you're telling me that Dylan Roof, the man who killed over a dozen African Americans in that church, listened to your lyrics. Do you feel a sense of guilt, the fact that it's possible that Dylan Root followed you in your white supremacist career and your lyrics and might have played a role in that shooting? I mean, I'm not trying to blame you here, but I would imagine something has to go through your head that says, oh, my God, this guy who killed all these innocent people was a fan of mine.
Yeah, every day. And it was 9 people that were murdered, and more were left to kind of tell the story of it.
Wow.
And there's not a day that goes by since I learned that, a little over a year ago, that I don't think about it, that I don't think about the responsibility that I have for having put those words out into the world. And I think about, I was just a 17-year-old, punk skinhead from an alley, and we now have people in power, throwing words around that are being used, to commit acts of violence and terrorism.
And I want to talk to you about that. I want to talk to you about Donald Trump. If you're just joining us, Christian Picciolini has got a former white supremacist, turned his life around. His book called Breaking Hate is out in February. Okay, before we get to Donald Trump and what's going on today as far as white supremacy goes and violence, what was the tipping point for you? At the age of 23 years old, you said you started as a white supremacist at 14. What happened at 23 that was the tipping point for you that said, I got to get out of this lifestyle, I got to change my ways?
I kind of sabotaged myself. I didn't know I was doing it at the time, but I opened a record store. I'd gotten married at 19, and we had our first son at 21, or at 19 and our second at 21. So I decided to kind of pull back from my leadership position and open a record store to sell this racist music that I was importing from Europe, and in some cases I was making myself. But I couldn't walk into the city hall and say I wanted to get a business license to sell Nazi music. So I just opened a small independent record shop that sold all kinds of music, including the racist music.
Right.
And what I didn't expect was that people who I had pushed away, or in cases that I hated them, or I thought I did, would come into my store to buy the hip hop and the punk rock and the heavy metal, and I started to meet for the first time in my life people who were Jewish, or who were gay, or who were black, or Asian or Latino, and they showed me compassion when I least deserved it. And they were the people I least deserved it from.
Wow.
And it really was powerful, because what it did was it replaced the demonization that I had of them with humanization. It certainly wasn't their responsibility.
Sure.
But they did.
Isn't that incredible?
Powerful.
Isn't that incredible, Christian, that the people that, for 8-9 years that you, grew up to hate were actually the same people that were showing you compassion and turned your life around? I want to talk to you a little bit. And by the way, I'm so glad that happened for you. I want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on today. We have Donald Trump demonizing illegal immigrants, people of color. I want to localize this. We had a Vegas man. You might have heard of this, Christian, who was recently arrested in Las Vegas plotting a white supremacist attack on the LGBTQ community at a bar and at a synagogue. Luckily, police were able to catch this guy, but we saw it happen in El Paso, Texas. We've seen it happen at the synagogue just outside of Pittsburgh. White supremacy is on the rise. Hate crime up 18% since Donald Trump took office. Am I only blaming Donald Trump? Absolutely not. But what do you make of what is going on in society today, and what do you make of people on the right that say, for example, Tucker Carlson on Fox News? You might have heard this, where Tucker said that the idea of white supremacy, it's not really happening. I'm kind of paraphrasing what he's saying, but he basically called it a hoax. He said, what do you make of that? You're the guy that needs to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that hate is not a hoax, and I can say that with 100% certainty. Speaking of Las Vegas, just a few years ago, there was an organized paramilitary training camp held in the desert there in Death Valley that was called a hate camp, where a group called Atomwaffen Division gathered a couple of dozen people to train with, fully automatic weapons for a race war. That same group, Atomwaffen Division, has killed, at least 5 people in the last 18 months. And the individual who was arrested that you're talking about was also influenced by some of the same elements. And he was influenced actually by a group in Ukraine called the Azov Battalion that has been recruiting young people, young white supremacists from America to go over to the Ukraine to train in these neo-Nazi kind of death camps, and then take that violence back home. And we're starting to see the effects of that. But this has been going on for many, many years. It isn't, it's certainly not about Donald Trump, although he isn't, he is fanning the flames of this because he's parroting so many of the same talking points that, I did when I was 18, 19, 20 years old.
Do you think Donald Trump is a white supremacist?
I think Donald Trump is a Trump supremacist. I think he doesn't really care for anybody who's not part of his inner circle, and that becomes, it's pretty malleable itself.
How can you explain the fact, though, that there's really little to no people of color in his administration?
Yeah, I mean, I can't explain it, but his policies point to racism. They're racist policies. They're being reinforced. Equivocating both sides. Now, while I think I have to believe that there were good people on both sides because I want to help them disengage, that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years, is helping people escape hate groups and extremist movements. But, the responsibility of those words is on the president, who has the most power of anybody in the world.
No doubt.
To use those words responsibly. And we've seen, his words referenced in manifestos.
Sure. So what would you say to a guy like David Duke right now? If you had a chance to sit alongside of David Duke, or, for example, if you went to a KKK rally, what would you say to people like that? And I also wanted to ask you, have you spoken to any KKK members? Because you just alluded to the fact that you're trying to help people, turn their life around, kind of like how yours was turned around. I mean, I would imagine you have engaged with these type of people, and I would imagine some of them don't like you for the fact that you went away from their beliefs.
No, they don't. They don't like me, or at least some of them don't. I've helped hundreds of people disengage from extremism, everything from neo-Nazis to white nationalists to Klan to even former ISIS members who fought in Syria.
Holy smokes! So you've actually met with? How does that happen? How do you meet up with an ISIS member?
Well, this was an individual who had gone. He was based in Belgium, had gone to fight in Syria. And then escaped and turned himself in, and he did some prison time for that. And on his, kind of his reentry, he reached out to me because I was speaking in Belgium, and he had really no one else to talk to, and thought maybe after hearing my story on the news in Brussels, that I might be able to relate. And in fact, we had almost identical stories. He was young and idealistic and motivated, and was finally seen by this group. And he also he went there with his brother, and his brother was killed. My younger brother was murdered in American gunfire here in the States on the street.
Oh,
so
my goodness.
We really did relate to a lot. But yeah, what's happening in this environment right now is really, it's kind of primed for extremism. People are uncertain. We're unsure of our leadership. We're unsure of each other. And frankly, we're starting to eat at each other. But a lot of this is also being influenced from foreign actors who benefit from our discord.
Christian, and by the way, for just joining us, it's Christian Picciolini, former white supremacist, turned his life around, has a new book that's coming out in February called Breaking Hate that I do want to talk to you about that. But, Christian, I think you are a perfect example of that people can change. We hear it all the time. Well, once a racist, always a racist. And, you can't change people. You can't change their views. And I'm not just even talking about white supremacy. I'm talking about anything in general. I think people can change if it is the right thing to do. And you're a perfect example of that. So what would you say to all these people out there? And there are a lot of people out there that say you can't change someone, you can't change their views. People are who they are. What would you say to those that spew that?
I think I'm that same person I was when I was 14 years old. I think I just got lost for 8 years of my life. So if people think you can't change, then maybe I just went back to that kid and I just know a lot more now. But what I would say is, you can't debate somebody out of this. You can't punch somebody out of this. That doesn't work. The only thing I've ever seen work is really trying to find a way to connect on the things that we all believe to be true. Like, we want our families to be healthy. We want jobs. We want security. We want education. If we can meet in the middle on those things, eventually we'll go off track. But we can always find our way to the middle. But if we start on opposite ends of the playing field and never find the middle, we'll just never get there.
Last question for you, Christian. And by the way, we really appreciate your time. I want you to talk to me a little bit about your book, Breaking Hate, that's going to be out in February. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's kind of a guide to the work that I do in helping people disengage from extremism and hate. And I look at it through the lens of 7 people that I've worked with, how they were radicalized and how I helped them de-radicalize. And there's a little bit of my story woven in there, too. So it's kind of a second act to my memoir, White American Youth.
Well, I'll tell you what, Christian, your story is fascinating, and it needs to be told everywhere. And thank you so much for your time. We'd love to have you on again, maybe in February when your book comes out, if that would be okay.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time, Christian. We appreciate it. There you go. Christian Picciolini, former white supremacist. Now, it's amazing. He just said he met with an ISIS member who reached out to him. He's talked to many KKK members trying to turn their lives around. This is the most fascinating part of that interview, to me anyway. I mean, there's so many fascinating parts to what we just spoke about. I mean, I could just touch on so many things that he said there. Dylan Roof, the kid who was responsible for killing, I believe it was 8 or 9 African Americans. Okay, it was actually 9 African Americans and injuring many others, was a fan of this guy we just had on the show. He listened to his music, his hate music back in the day, and it is certainly not out of bounds to say that because of Christian Picciolini and his songs might have played a role and a part in Dylan Roof going into that church, killing all of those innocent people. And I asked him about that, and he said, yeah, I think about that every day. I feel the guilt every day. That is why I keep saying, guys, words matter. Okay? I'm not 100% blaming the president for anything. Okay? He's a jerk. I'll say that. But that's why I keep telling you guys out there that words matter. This guy wrote some hateful lyrics, and then Dylan Roof goes into a church and kills innocent people. Donald Trump says some hateful things about illegals and Mexicans, and then this guy drives up to El Paso and kills a bunch of brown people using the same verbiage. You cannot tell me that words don't matter. Words absolutely matter, and it influences people, psychopaths. And don't you give me this crap, wow, they're crazy. They were going to kill innocent people anyway. Don't give crazy people a reason to commit hateful acts. And that is what the KKK does. That is what white supremacy does. And at times, that is what our president does. And it is wrong. And it needs to stop. And we need to hear from people like Christian, who have to live with it every day for the rest of his life, that he is a former white supremacist that could have been one of the key reasons why Dylan Roof went into a church and killed 9 innocent people, because they were black. The only reason, make no mistake about it, because of their skin color. And don't you tell me white supremacy is a hoax, Tucker Carlson, because Christian is a perfect example that it is not a hoax. And it hits home. It hits right here in Las Vegas, because we had a Vegas man who was arrested for plotting a white supremacist attack at a gay bar and a synagogue. Imagine how many innocent people, thank God, didn't die, but could have died. Do you think these people just get these ideas on their own? Oh, you know what? I'm just going to go out there and kill a bunch of black people. You know what? I'm just going to go out there and kill a bunch of Jews. No, there has to be something out there that influences them. Christian said he was influenced when he was 14 years old. Well, guess what? We need to change things in this country. We need to do the opposite of influencing people to commit hate crimes. There needs to be more people like Christian out there to spread the word that it is wrong. Your words are important. They matter. And hate will not and should not ever be tolerated, period. His book, Breaking Hate, comes out in February, and I guarantee you it is going to be a fascinating and it is going to be a really, really good read. We're going to take a quick break, be back right after this. Oh, boy, do we have a lot to get to coming up here in the next 90 minutes of this show. We're going to talk a little Shriners Hospital for Children's Open. AB, another story that came out, he's trashing a condo. Did you hear about this? A fan is saving babies and at the same time quoting the Eagles, ripping the Eagles. Yeah, you can't make this stuff up. Oh, and a Vegas Miley Cyrus story? Yeah, we'll get to all this coming up next. You're listening to the Vegas Take right here on the all-new 101.5 FM, 720 AM, KDAWN.